Just make sure that you connect biology. No.
What the heck
Yeah.
Theoretically, I don't have a bibliography yet for the rough draft. Is that acceptable?
Theoretically, possibly.
Theoretically possible. Okay.
Okay. All right, guys.
Could you consider that suggestion for the next class?
My name is Ron Finkelberg. I've decided to do my 20% project on 3 topics. So the brain, memory, and Alzheimer's. The reason why I've chosen to dive into these topics is because many millions of people throughout the world are affected each year by Alzheimer's, and it's become personal recently as one of my close relatives actually has Alzheimer's. I'd like to start off with an overview of how my presentation is going to look. To understand what's going to happen at the end, I think the audience needs to have an understanding, basic understanding in neurology. So I'm going to start off with the anatomy of the brain, then move into the memory. From the memory, move into the physiology of the brain, then look into Alzheimer's. So just an overview of the actual disease itself and some possible treatments. Then finally, I'm going to wrap everything up with potential treatments of the future and methods of prevention. The first section of the brain which I'd like to talk about is the amygdala. So the amygdala is the controller of fear and the fight or flight reflex. It's located in the temporal lobe, so the lower section of the brain. Next, I'd like to talk about the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with decision-making and good or bad judgment. So us teenagers are famous for not having fully developed prefrontal cortexes, so I think we shouldn't be held accountable for our poor decision-making. Also, the prefrontal cortex is the holder of short and long-term memories, and it's the controller of the amygdala. The last section of the brain which I'd like to talk about is the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is where the brain actually grows, and it also has a large effect on the mood. The new memories are stored in the hippocampus as well. An interesting case which I'd like to point out about Alzheimer's and a specific patient. Alzheimer's ends up destroying memories by destroying the hippocampus and the amygdala as well, because those two are very interlinked. So a man by the name of Henry Molaison of Connecticut actually had his hippocampus surgically removed in the 1950s to treat severe epilepsy. So although his epilepsy wasn't treated, or it was treated rather, he couldn't retain any new memories, similar to patients with Alzheimer's. Simply put, there are 2 types of memories. The first type of memory is short-term memory. So short-term memory holds short snippets of information. So perhaps a phone number that someone gives to you before you can input it into your phone, or a waiter taking your order without writing it down on a piece of paper. Long-term memory is a bit more broad. So there's 4 basic types of long-term memory. The first 2, implicit and episodic. So implicit is one's general memory, which is consciously remembered. So perhaps how to ride a bike or drive a car. Episodic memory is more associated with episodes of your life. So where you were born or the house that you currently live in. The last 2 types of long-term memory are semantic and procedural. So semantic is something like your alphabet or counting from 0 to 100. It's just general knowledge of the world, while procedural memory is motor skills. So writing or walking are both procedural memory. Before I dive into this section, I'd like to pose a question to the audience. Is anyone familiar with neurons or synapses? I know Fahad just touched upon that. Caroline?
Well, from Fahad's presentation, I know that neuron is like a cell, or like a cell that transmits.
Anyone else?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, so
Does there help to like spread the information throughout the brain?
yeah, perfect. So neurons are a type of cell found in the brain, and synapses are gaps in between the neurons. So although Fahad started talking about neurons, he didn't finish everything. So there are two crucial parts to a neuron. There's the dendrite, which ends up receiving the signal, and then there's the axon, which is the center of the signal. That's the very basic part of it. But because neurons are cells, they still have regular pieces of a cell, if you will. There's the cell body, which is the holder of the cytoplasm and the nucleus, and the myelin sheath, which actually ends up speeding the signal between the networks of neurons. Next, synapses. So synapses, as aforementioned, are these tiny gaps in between neurons, and chemical signals called neurotransmitters end up traveling through them. So if you look here, this is a diagram of a neuron chain, if you will. So these are the synapses. This would be the dendrite, and the axon is located here. So as you can see, there are multiple synapses between certain neurons. Now, the physiology of the brain. So in the brain, there are two types of signals, electrical and chemical. So electrical signals can be thought of as the start to the reaction. They are also called action potentials, and they end up pushing the chemical signal through, and the chemical signal is the thing which actually ends up doing the work or causing for a process to be carried out in the body. With the information that was presented earlier in this presentation regarding the brain and some of its functions, I'd like to focus in on Alzheimer's specifically now. Although Alzheimer's is a disease which is being researched thoroughly right now, the information that we have is very limited as of now. So I'd like to talk about two types of hypotheses which are commonly accepted throughout the scientific community. The first is the amyloid beta hypothesis. So a type of protein called amyloid beta ends up building up between neurons in the brain, which causes the neuronal function to be disrupted. So if you look here in the lower section of the brain, which is where the hippocampus and amygdala are located, this is a normal person's brain, while this is a patient with Alzheimer's. You can see these large gaps. That's where the amyloid beta ends up building up. The way that these amyloid beta proteins end up building up is in plaques. So they end up clogging certain sections of the brain, so the signal can't pass through, similar to a person with high levels of cholesterol whose arteries are clogged and the blood can't pass. The next hypothesis, which I'd like to touch upon, is tau. So other conditions such as CTE also are affected by tau. Tau, simply put, maintains the structure of a neuron. It's located usually in the axon. And in patients with Alzheimer's, it ends up flowing back into the cell body, which causes for the neuron to collapse. And then obviously the signal can't go through. When the tau ends up receding back into the cell body, it ends up twisting, and then information can't flow between neurons. Is anyone familiar with treatments offered to patients right now for Alzheimer's? Does anyone perhaps have grandparents with Alzheimer's? No? Okay, well. to understand common medication administered to patients, you have to have an understanding of neurotransmitters. So the specific neurotransmitter acetylcholine conducts signals in the synapse. So this would be the neurotransmitter as it goes through the synapse. And then the neurotransmitter ends up binding to the receptor, which allows for a signal to go through. So the medication commonly offered type of medication is called cholinesterase inhibitor, and it allows for a signal to be carried through for a longer period of time by slowing down the deterioration of it. So the way that that neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, ends up being deteriorated, the way that the signal ends up dying, is by an enzyme changing the shape of it so that it won't bind to the receptor anymore, and then the cycle restarts. So a common medication offered to patients is called Aricept. It is indeed a cholinesterase inhibitor, and it allows for the concentration of the neurotransmitter to be increased by decreasing the percentage of enzymes, which slows down the signal and or slows down the process and allows for the signal to be carried through for a longer period of time. So as of now, a really important thing to understand is that Alzheimer's isn't cured, and there's no way to slow down the progression of it. All of the medications which are offered can only silence the symptoms for a short period of time. So treatments of the future will look into slowing down the progression or perhaps even curing the disease. Now moving into the last section of the presentation, prevention of Alzheimer's. So this section directly applies to the audience. By having a very specific diet, Alzheimer's can be prevented. So being sugar-free, eating lots of fatty acids such as omega-3, which is commonly found in fish, maintaining a Mediterranean diet, and having plenty of antioxidants such as tea or berries can help with the prevention of Alzheimer's. Sleeping flushes the brain of the amyloid B protein. So having a consistent sleep schedule is pertinent to not only your health but also to the prevention of Alzheimer's. Exercising both moderately and consistently, approximately 3 to 4 times a week, also can help prevent Alzheimer's. And then lastly, I know none of you guys would do this, but smoking obviously is something that you shouldn't do. Also, drinking 1 to 2 glasses of red wine a night helps to prevent Alzheimer's and maintain your health. I don't recommend any of you guys to do that yet. And then just generally staying healthy, controlling your blood pressure, your weight, and your cholesterol levels can all help prevent Alzheimer's. Thank you. Any questions? Actually, are there any questions? Owen?
What is the Mediterranean diet?
Mediterranean diet. So it's a combination of all of the things which were listed above. So this is a picture of the Mediterranean diet. It consists a lot of eating little red meats, so lots of white meat like chicken and turkey, a lot of antioxidants, lots of fruits and vegetables especially are emphasized in the Mediterranean diet. And as you can see, fish, because the Mediterranean Sea, of course, is the home to fish.
So probably say what that is in the presentation, just
Yeah.
so people like me don't know what that is.
Okay, I'll definitely say.
Okay. One good thing, one thing he needs to work on.
Fahad.
Okay, so good things. I'll start with the good things. So I thought your explanation was thorough. It was very professional. The nonverbal communication is next step. You can show you the actual audience what was happening. The pace was good. It was slow. I could understand what you were saying. You were explaining every turn that came up on the board. And I don't know about eye contact. I mean, I didn't get much eye contact. Maybe it's because something that you were wrong. But
Yeah.
apart from that, I think everything was good.
Negatives?
Oh yeah.
No, things to work on, not a negative.
Okay. Things to work on. I would say vocal fillers. There's a lot of uhs,